Jack Alan Abramoff is an American former lobbyist, businessman, movie producer and writer. He was at the center of an extensive corruption investigation that led to his conviction and 21 persons either pleading guilty or being found guilty, including White House officials J. Stephen Giles and David Safavian, U.S. Representative Bob Ney, and 9 other lobbyists and congressional aides. Abramoff was College Republican National Committee National Chairman from 1981 to 1985, a founding member of the International Freedom Foundation, allegedly financed by apartheid South Africa, and served on the board of directors of the National Center for Public Policy Research, a conservative think tank. From 1994 to 2001 he was a top lobbyist for the firm of Preston Gates and Ellis, and then for Greenberg Tricks until March 2004. After a guilty plea in the Jack Abramoff Native American lobbying scandal and his dealings with Sun Cruise casinos in January 2006, he was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for mail fraud, conspiracy to bribe public officials, and tax evasion. He served 43 months before being released on December 3, 2010. After his release from prison, he wrote the autobiographical book Capital Punishment: The Hard Truth About Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyist, which was published in November 2011. Abramoff's lobbying and the surrounding scandals and investigation are the subject of 2 2010 films, the documentary Casino Jack and the United States of Money, released in May 2010, and the feature film Casino Jack, released on December 17, 2010, starring Kevin Spacey as Abramoff. Early life: Jack Abramoff was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey, into a Jewish family. His parents were Jane and Franklin Abramoff, who was president of the franchises unit of Diners Club Credit Card Company. Abramoff's family moved to Beverly Hills, California, when he was 10, and there he attended Beverly Hills High School. In high school, he played football and became a weight-lifting champion. After seeing the film version of Fiddler on the Roof at age 12, Abramoff decided to practice Orthodox Judaism. Jack Abramoff is reported, in the prologue of radio show episode 314 of This American Life with Ira Glass, as bullying an interviewee during high school. Jack Abramoff was reported to squat 510 pounds, and was a jock. College and law school years: as an undergraduate at Brandeis University, Abramoff served as chairman of the Massachusetts Alliance of College Republicans, which organized student volunteers for Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign. He graduated with a B.A. in English in 1981, taking 6 years to finish his degree, and earned his Juris Doctor from the Georgetown University Law Center in 1986. According to Nina Easton, Abramoff gained much of his credibility in the conservative movement through his father, Franklin Abramoff. As president of Diners Club International, Abramoff's father worked closely with Alfred S. Bloomingdale, a personal friend of Ronald Reagan. College Republican National Chairman: after graduating from Brandeis, Abramoff ran for election as chairman of the College Republican National Committee. After a campaign which cost over $10,000 and was managed by Grover Norquist, Abramoff won the election after the chief competitor, Amy Moritz, was persuaded to drop out. Abramoff changed the direction of the committee and made it more activist and conservative than ever before, notes the CRNC. "It is not our job to seek peaceful coexistence with the left," Abramoff was quoted as saying in the group's 1983 annual report. "Our job is to remove them from power permanently." Norquist served as executive director of the committee under Abramoff. He later recruited Ralph Reed, a former president of the University of Georgia College Republicans chapter, as an unpaid intern. According to Reed's book Active Faith, Reed also introduced Abramoff to his future wife, Pamela Clark Alexander. As chair of the CRNC, Abramoff addressed the 1984 Republican National Convention in Dallas, Texas. Long-standing college political alliances: at the CRNC, Abramoff developed political alliances with college Republican chapter presidents across the nation, many who would later hold key roles in state and national politics and business, and some who would later interact with Abramoff as a lobbyist. Some of those relationships were at the core of the federal investigation. At the CRNC, Abramoff, Nyquist and Reed formed what was known as the Abramoff-Nyquist-Reed Triumvirate. After Abramoff's election, the trio purged dissidents, and rewrote the CRNC's bylaws to consolidate their control over the organization. According to Easton's Gang of Five, Reed was the hatchet man, and carried out Abramoff-Nyquist orders with ruthless efficiency, not bothering to hide his fingerprints. In 1983, the CRNC passed a resolution condemning deliberate planted propaganda by the KGB and Soviet proxy forces against the government of South Africa, at a time when the country's government was under worldwide criticism for the apartheid regime. In 1984, Abramoff and other college Republicans formed the USA Foundation, a non-partisan tax-exempt organization which held 2 days of rallies on college campuses around the United States celebrating the first anniversary of the invasion of Grenada. In a letter to campus Republican leaders, Abramoff claimed, "Citizens for America." In 1985, Abramoff joined Citizens for America, a pro-Reagan group that helped Oliver North build support for the Nicaraguan Contras. Citizens for America staged an unprecedented meeting of anti-communist rebel leaders known as the Democratic International in Jumba, Angola. This conference included leaders of the Mujahideen from Afghanistan, UNITA from Angola, the Contras, and opposition groups from Laos. Out of this largely ceremonial conference came the International Freedom Foundation. Abramoff helped to organize, and also attended the conference. Abramoff's membership ended on a sour note when Citizens for America's sponsor Louis Luman, a former New York gubernatorial candidate, concluded that Abramoff had spent his money carelessly. In 1986, Reagan appointed Abramoff as a member of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. Work in film production, and South Africa connections, Abramoff spent 10 years in Hollywood. He developed and produced, with his brother Robert, the 1989 film Red Scorpion. The film ultimately cost $16 million and starred Dolph Lundgren playing the Spetsnaz-like Soviet commando Nikolai, sent by the USSR to assassinate an African revolutionary in a country similar to Angola. Nikolai sees the evil of the Soviets and changes sides, becoming a freedom fighter for the African side. Abramoff also executive produced its 1994 sequel Red Scorpion 2. The South African government financed the film via the International Freedom Foundation, a fund group chaired by Abramoff, as part of its efforts to undermine international sympathy for the African National Congress. The filming location was in Southwest Africa. On April 27, 1998, Abramoff wrote a letter to the editor of the Seattle Times rebutting an article critical of him and his alleged role as effectively a public relations puppet of the then-apartheid South African military. Abramoff rebutted, "The IFF was a conservative group which I headed. It was vigorously anti-communist, but it was also actively anti-apartheid. In 1987, it was one of the first conservative groups to call for the release of Nelson Mandela, a position for which it was roundly criticized by other conservatives at the time. While I headed the IFF, we accepted funding only from private individuals and corporations and would have absolutely rejected any offer of South African military funding, or any other kind of funding from any government, good or evil." During this period in South Africa, Abramoff first met South Afrikaner-born Rabbi David Lapine, who would become his religious advisor, and Lapine's brother and fellow Rabbi Daniel Lapine, who allegedly introduced Abramoff to Congressman Tom DeLay at a Washington, D.C. dinner shortly after the Republican takeover of Congress in 1994. Lapine later claimed that he did not recall the introduction. Seattle-based lobbying. In December 1994, Abramoff was hired as a lobbyist at Preston Gates Ellis and Rowlers Meads LLP, the lobbying arm of the law firm Preston Gates and Ellis LLP based in Seattle, Washington. According to the Seattle Times, following the Republican takeover of Congress in 1995, partner Emanuel Rowlers determined that the firm didn't have a conservative, Christian coalition Republican with strong ties to the new Republican leadership. The traditionally Democratic-leaning firm hired Abramoff for the specific purpose of attaining these wanted ties. Abramoff was described in a press release as having close ties to Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey. According to the Seattle Times, Abramoff used Preston Gates and Ellis to access a higher pedigree of clientele. Choctaw gambling. In 1995, Abramoff began representing Native American tribes with gambling interests. He became involved with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Native Americans. One of Abramoff's first acts as a tribal gaming lobbyist was to defeat a congressional bill to tax Native American casinos, sponsored by Bill Archer and Ernest Istook. According to Washington Business Forward, a lobbying trade magazine, Tom DeLay was a major factor in those victories, and the fight helped cement the alliance between the two men. DeLay has called Abramoff one of closest and dearest friends. The Washington Post, on December 29, 2005, reported, Jack Abramoff liked to slip into dialogue from The Godfather as he led his lobbying colleagues in planning their next conquest on Capitol Hill. In a favorite bit, he would mimic an ice-cold Michael Corleone facing down a crooked politician's demand for a cut of mafia gambling profits. "Senator, you can have my answer now if you like. My offer is this: nothing." Salon.com political writer Thomas Frank considers Abramoff to have acted as a con man. In an appearance with former U.S. Representative Bob Ney and former Greenberg Trigg lobbyist Neil Volz on KOJO-NNAMDI's national public radio affiliate WAMU-FM radio show, Alex Gibney, director and writer of the 2010 film Casino Jack and the United States of Money, elaborated on Abramoff's criminal modus operandi. Gibney remarked, "One of his great gifts was being able to tell people what they wanted to hear, and this was how he was able to sell things and get them into trouble." Saipan and Northern Mariana Islands. Abramoff and his law firm were paid at least $6.7 million by the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands from 1995 to 2001, which made manufactured goods with the Made in the USA label but was not subject to U.S. labor and minimum wage laws. After Abramoff paid for DeLay and his staffers to go on trips to the CNMI, they crafted policy that extended exemptions from federal immigration and labor laws to the island's industries. Abramoff also negotiated for a $1.2 million no-bid contract from the Marianas for promoting ethics in government to be awarded to David Lapine, brother of Daniel Lapine. Abramoff also secretly funded a trip for James E. Clibborn and Benny Thompson. In 1999, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher went on an Abramoff-funded trip to the Marshall Islands with John Doolittle, Ken Calvert, delegates of Guam, American Samoa, Virgin Islands and Nate staffers. Documentation also indicates that Abramoff's lobbying team helped prepare Representative Ralph Hall's statements on the House floor in which he attacked the credibility of escaped teenage sex worker Katrina, in an attempt to discredit her testimony regarding the state of the sex slave industry on the island. Ms. Magazine also explored Abramoff's dealings in the CNMI and the plight of garment workers like Katrina in their spring 2006 article. Later lobbying efforts involved mailings from a Ralph Reed marketing company to Christian conservative voters and bribery of Roger Stilwell, a Department of the Interior official who in 2006 pleaded guilty to accepting gifts from Abramoff. Naftazib, executives of Naftazib, a Russian energy company, funneled almost $3.4 million to Abramoff and DeLay advisor Ed Buckham between 1997 and 2005. About $60,000 was spent on a trip to Russia in 1997 for Tom DeLay, Buckham, and Abramoff. In 1998, $1 million was sent to Buckham via his organization U.S. Family Network to influence DeLay's vote in 1998 on legislation that helped make it possible for the International Monetary Fund to bail out the faltering Russian economy. DeLay voted for the legislation. The money was funneled through the Dutch company Vuhuizen, the Bahamas company Chelsea Enterprises, and the London law firm James and Sarch Company. The executives involved, who met DeLay during the 1997 trip, were Marina Nevskaya and Alexander Kulikovsky. Nevskaya was also involved in Abramoff's support of an Israeli military academy, as indicated by an email sent to Abramoff. E-Lottery, Incorporated. In 1999, E-Lottery hired Abramoff to block the Internet Gambling Prohibition Act, which he did by enlisting Reed, Norquist, and Tom DeLay's former chief of staff, Tony Rudy. Emails from 2000 show that Susan Ralston helped Abramoff pass checks from E-Lottery to Lou Sheldon's Traditional Values Coalition and also to Nyquist's Americans for Tax Reform, en route to Reed's company, Century Strategies. Abramoff joins Greenberg Trigg. On January 8, 2001, Abramoff left Preston Gates to join the Government Relations Division of the Washington, D.C. law firm Greenberg Trigg, which once described him as directly involved in the Republican Party and conservative movement leadership structures, and one of the leading fundraisers for the party and its congressional candidates. With the move to Greenberg Trigg, Abramoff took as much as $6 million worth of client business from his old firm, including the Marianas Islands account. At Greenberg Trigg, Abramoff recruited a team of lobbyists known familiarly as Team Abramoff. The team included many of his former employees from Preston Gates and former senior staffers of members of Congress. Tribal lobbying. Around the time he joined Greenberg Trigg, Abramoff's choice of lobbying clients changed to focus much more on Native American tribes. While Abramoff was a registered lobbyist for 51 clients while working at Preston Gates, with only 4 being tribes, Abramoff would eventually represent 24 clients for whom he was registered lobbyist at Greenberg Trigg, of which 7 were tribes. Tyco International Limited. Former White House Deputy Counsel Timothy Flanagan left his job in December 2002 to work as General Counsel for Corporate and International Law at Tyco International. He immediately hired Abramoff to lobby Congress and the White House on matters relating to Tyco's Bermuda tax-exempt status. Flanagan stated to the Senate Judiciary Committee that Abramoff bragged that he could help Tyco avoid tax liability aimed at offshore companies because he had good relationships with members of Congress. Tyco Incorporated claimed in August 2005 that Abramoff had been paid $1.7 million for astroturfing, or the creation of a fake grassroots campaign to oppose proposals to penalize U.S. corporations registered abroad for tax reasons. The work allegedly was never performed, and most of the fee Tyco paid Abramoff to lobby against the legislation was diverted to entities controlled by Mr. Abramoff. Lobbying for national governments, Abramoff's team represented the government of Malaysia, and worked toward improving Malaysian relations with the United States, particularly with trade relations. Abramoff also met with the government of Sudan, offering a plan to deflect criticism from American Christian groups over the regime's alleged role in the Darfur conflict. Abramoff promised to enlist Reed to assist, as well as starting a grassroots campaign to improve the image of Sudan in America. Channel One News. Abramoff was a lobbyist for the school TV news service Channel One News. From 1999 to 2003, Channel One retained him to ensure Congress did not block funds to their service. Not only did Channel One face frequent campaigns by political groups to persuade Congress to limit its presence in schools, but it also derived much of its advertising revenue from U.S. government sources, including the Office of National Drug Control Policy and military recruitment. Since Abramoff and Channel One parted ways, Channel One's advertising revenues have dropped substantially, but a cause-and-effect relationship would be difficult to establish. Telecommunications firm. On October 18, 2005, The Washington Post reported that Bob Ney, as chair of the House Administration Committee, approved a 2002 license for an Israeli telecommunications company to install antennas for the House of Representatives. The company, then Foxconn Wireless, an Israeli startup telecommunications firm, later paid Abramoff $280,000 for lobbying. It also donated $50,000 to the Capital Athletic Foundation charity that Abramoff sometimes used to secretly pay for some of his lobbying activities. In Michael Scanlon's plea agreement, this activity was described as public corruption. Skyboxes, Signatures, and Scotland. Abramoff maintained 4 skyboxes at major sports arenas for political entertaining at a cost of over $1 million a year. Abramoff hosted many fundraisers at these skyboxes, including events for politicians publicly opposed to gambling, such as John Doolittle. Then Senate Finance Committee ranking member and current chairman Max Baucus returned $18,892 in contributions that his office found to be connected to Abramoff. Included in the return donations was an estimated $1,892 that was never reported for Baucus' use of Abramoff's skybox at a professional sports arena and concert venue in downtown Washington in 2001. Abramoff also was co-owner of Signature's Restaurant, a high-end Washington establishment which he used to reward friends and associates. His fellow lobbyist Kevin Ehring treated Justice Department official Robert E. Corlin to free tickets to the skyboxes and took him out to Signatures multiple times in exchange for favors. The restaurant, once thriving, was closed once investigations closed in on Abramoff. Delay. Ney and Florida Republican Representative Tom Feeney have each gone on golf trips to Scotland that were apparently arranged or funded by Abramoff. These trips took place in 2000, 2002 and 2003. Ney and Feeney each claimed that their trips were paid for by the National Center for Public Policy Research, but the group denied this. Spokespeople for Ney and Feeney blamed others for filing errors. Ney later pleaded guilty to knowing that Abramoff had paid for the trip. A former top procurement official in the Bush administration, David H. Safavian, has been convicted of lying and obstruction of justice in connection with the Abramoff investigation. Safavian, who traveled to Scotland with Reid and Ney on a golf outing arranged by Abramoff, was accused of concealing from federal investigators information about Abramoff's plans to do business with the General Services Administration at the time of the golf trip, in particular, seeking help finding property for his private religious school, Eshkol Academy, and for one of his tribal clients. Safavian was then GSA Chief of Staff. Access to the Bush administration. Jack Abramoff was a highly influential figure as lobbyist and activist in the Bush administration. In 2001, Abramoff was a member of the Bush administration's 2001 Transition Advisory Team assigned to the Department of the Interior. Abramoff befriended the incoming Deputy Secretary of the Interior J. Stephen Griles. The draft report of the House Government Reform Committee said the documents largely Abramoff's billing records and emails listed 485 lobbying contacts with White House officials over 3 years, including 10 with top Bush aide Karl Rove. The report said that of the 485 contacts listed, 345 were described as meetings or other in-person contacts. 71 were described as phone conversations and 69 were email exchanges. In the first 10 months of 2001, the Abramoff lobbying team logged almost 200 contacts with the Bush administration. He may have used these senior-level contacts to assist in his lobbying for Indian tribes concerning tribal gaming. The Department of the Interior has federal regulatory authority over tribal affairs such as tribal recognition and gaming. From 2000 to 2003, 6 Indian tribes paid Abramoff over $80 million in lobbying fees. The Department of the Interior Office of Insular Affairs has authority over policy and grants to U.S. territories such as the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. This may have assisted Abramoff in lobbying for textile interests in the islands. U.S. Senator Conrad Burns and DeLay also heavily lobbied the CNMI for opposing the minimum wage. Abramoff asked for $9 million in 2003 from the president of Gabon, Omar Bongo, to arrange a meeting with Bush and directed his fees to an Abramoff-controlled lobbying firm, Grassroots Interactive. Bongo did meet with Bush in the Oval Office on May 26, 2004. There has been no evidence in the public record that Abramoff had any role in organizing the meeting, or that he received any money or had a signed contract with Gabon. White House and State Department officials described Bush's meeting with Bongo, whose government is regularly accused by the United States of human rights abuses, as routine. The officials said they knew of no involvement by Abramoff in the arrangements. Officials at Gabon's embassy in Washington did not respond to written questions. Susan Ralston, Rove's assistant since 2001, previously worked as an administrative assistant for both Abramoff and Reid. According to former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, Abramoff was paid $1.2 million to arrange a meeting between Mahathir and Bush, allegedly at the direction of the Heritage Foundation. Mahathir insisted that someone unknown to him had paid for the meeting. On May 9, 2001, Chief Raul Gatza of the Kickapoo tribe of Texas met with Bush, with Abramoff and Nyquist in attendance. Abramoff was identified in the background of a photo taken at the meeting. Days before the meeting, the tribe paid $25,000 to Nyquist's Americans for tax reform at Abramoff's direction. According to the organization's communications director, John Karch, the meeting was one of several gatherings with Bush sponsored by ATR. On the same day, the chief of the Louisiana Cowshatters also attended an ATR-sponsored gathering with Bush. The Cowshatters also gave $25,000 to ATR soon before the event. The details of the Kickapoo meeting and a letter dated May 10, 2001, from ATR thanking the Kickapoos for their contribution were revealed to the New York Times in 2006 by former council elder Isidro Gatza, who with Raul Gatza, is under indictment in Texas for embezzling tribal money. According to Isidro Gatza, Abramoff did not say the donation was required to meet Bush. The White House denied any knowledge of the transaction. Other photos have surfaced of Abramoff and Bush meeting at the White House and Oval Office on either December 22 or 23, 2002. The photos were found on a site that published many pictures of governmental events, reflectionsorders.com. The owner of the site removed the photos almost immediately when the presence of Abramoff and Bush together was discovered. Some Internet users located the photos and preserved copies of some of them. The owner of the site gave thousands of dollars to the Bush campaign and Republican National Committee, according to public FEC contribution records. An NPR News report from March 2006 stated that Abramoff recently granted a rare press interview to Vanity Fair magazine, where he asserts President Bush and other prominent figures in Washington know him very well. He called them liars for denying contact with him. In June 2006, Abramoff began secretly granting exclusive interviews to former Boston Globe investigative reporter Gary S. Chaffetz, without the knowledge of Abramoff's attorneys or the federal prosecutors with whom Abramoff had been cooperating. These interviews are conducted before and during Abramoff's imprisonment continued until May 2008. In September 2008, Chaffetz's book, The Perfect Villain, John McCain and the Demonization of Lobbyist Jack Abramoff was rushed into print prior to the 2008 presidential election. In his book, Chaffetz asserted that Abramoff, though guilty of some of the charges, was the victim of misleading and sensational reporting by The Washington Post, vengeance and mendacity on the part of Senator John McCain, and strong-arm tactics of the Justice Department who forced Abramoff into confessing to crimes he did not believe he was guilty of. Chaffetz also accused federal prosecutors of abusive and possibly illegal tactics in their reliance on private and public honest services fraud, which he characterized as vague and controversial. Abramoff organizations. Abramoff has founded or ran several non-profit organizations, including Capital Athletic Foundation and Eshkol Academy, as well as lobbying firms and political think tanks such as American International Center, Grassroots Interactive, and the National Center for Public Policy Research. While these organizations had varying degrees of legitimate activities, it has come to light that Abramoff used these organizations to channel millions of dollars to recipients not related to the organizations. Capital Athletic Foundation and Eshkol Academy. Although federal tax records show that various Indian tribes donated more than $6 million to the Capital Athletic Foundation, less than 1% of the money went to athletic programs, the stated purpose of the foundation. The majority of the funds went to the Eshkol Academy in Maryland, an Orthodox Jewish school founded by Abramoff in 2002. Hundreds of thousands of dollars from CAF were also spent on golf trips to Scotland for Abramoff, Ney, Reid, and Safavian, as well as purchases of camping equipment sent to a high school friend. Abramoff solicited Safavian's help in looking for property deals for Eshkol Academy and tribal clients, leading to Safavian's conviction. Grassroots Interactive and K. Gold. Grassroots Interactive, now defunct, was a small Silver Spring, Maryland, lobbying firm controlled by Abramoff. Millions of dollars flowed into Grassroots Interactive in 2003, the year it was created, and then flowed out again to unusual places. At least $2.3 million went to a California consulting firm that used the same address as the law office of Abramoff's brother, Robert. A separate check for $400,000, from Grassroots, was made out to K Gold LLC, another Abramoff family company. Malden Institute. Abramoff was a board member and secretary-treasurer of the Malden Institute for at least 5 years. He was one of only 4 board members, including John Reese. Scandal and criminal investigations. In late 2004, the Senate Indian Affairs Committee began to investigate Abramoff's lobbying on behalf of American Indian tribes and casinos. In September he was called before the committee to answer questions about that work, but pleaded the Fifth. Sun Cruise Casino fraud conviction. On August 11, 2005, Abramoff and Adam Cadan were indicted by a federal grand jury in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on fraud charges arising from a 2000 deal to buy Sun Cruise casinos from Konstantinos Gaspoulas. Abramoff and Cadan are accused of using a fake wire transfer to make lenders believe that they had made a $23 million down payment, in order to qualify for a $60 million loan. Cadan received the same sentence as Abramoff, €5 years, 10 months, which he began serving at Fort Dix Federal Penitentiary, in Fort Dix, New Jersey, on October 23, 2006. Ney also was implicated in helping to consummate the deal. After the partners purchased Sun Cruise in September 2000, the business relationship with Boulos deteriorated, culminating in a fist fight between Cadan and Boulos in December 2000. In February 2001, Boulos was murdered in his car in a mafia-style attack. The murder investigation, which presently includes 3 mobsters who had received payments from Cadan, is ongoing. 2 of the suspects face the death penalty. Sun Cruise is now owned and operated by Oceans Casinos Cruises. On January 4, 2006, Abramoff pleaded guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud in Miami, related to the Sun Cruise deal. The plea agreement called for a maximum sentence of over 7 years and would run simultaneously with a sentence in the Washington corruption case, but could be reduced if Abramoff cooperates fully. The remaining 4 counts in the Florida indictment were dismissed. On March 29, 2006, Abramoff and Cadan were both sentenced in the Sun Cruise case to the minimum amount, 70 months, and to pay $21.7 million in restitution. According to the Memorandum in Aid of Sentencing, the sentencing judge, U.S. District Judge Paul C. Huck, received over 260 pleas for leniency from various people, including rabbis, military officers and even a professional hockey referee. The defendants are still cooperating with federal investigators and will be sentenced later in the Indian lobbying case. Guam Grand Jury Investigation. In 2002, Abramoff was retained under a secret contract by the Guam Superior Court to lobby against a bill proposing to put the Superior Court under the authority of the Guam Supreme Court. On November 18, 2002, a grand jury issued a subpoena demanding that the administrator of the Guam Superior Court release all records relating to the contract. On November 19, 2002, U.S. Attorney Frederick A. Black, the chief prosecutor for Guam and the instigator of the indictment, was unexpectedly demoted and removed from the office he had held since 1991. The federal grand jury investigation was quickly wound down and took no further action. In 2005, public auditor Doris Flores Brooks initiated a new investigation of the Abramoff contract, which is continuing. In 2006, California attorney and Marshall Islands lobbyist Howard Hills, and Tony Sanchez, a former administrator of the Guam Superior Court, were indicted for unlawful influence, conspiracy for unlawful influence, theft of property held in trust, and official misconduct for allegedly authorizing 36 payments of $9,000 via pre-existing contract between Hills and the Guam Superior Court, each written out to Hills, but funneled to Abramoff. Hills, trusting Sanchez as a court official at face value, assumed that this was a temporary circumstance and agreed to help facilitate transition for what he thought was a standard government contract between Abramoff and the court. For this, Hills received no compensation. Before indictments or investigations were initiated, Hills halted his temporary contract with Abramoff and reported what he thought was potentially suspicious behavior to public officials when it occurred to him that something may be wrong. In 2007, superseding indictments were issued against Hills and Sanchez, and in 2008 further related indictments were handed down against Abramoff and Abramoff's firm at the time, Greenberg Trigg. The charges against both attorney Howard Hills and Greenberg Trigg have since been dismissed. Indian tribes grand jury investigations. Abramoff and his partner, Michael Scanlon, conspired to bilk Indian casino gambling interests out of an estimated $85 million in fees. The lobbyists also orchestrated lobbying against their own clients in order to force them to pay for lobbying services. These practices were the subject both of long-running criminal prosecution and hearings by the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. On November 21, 2005, Scanlon pleaded guilty to conspiring to bribe a member of Congress and other public officials. On January 3, 2006, Abramoff pleaded guilty to 3 felony counts conspiracy, fraud, and tax evasion involving charges stemming principally from his lobbying activities in Washington on behalf of Native American tribes. In addition, Abramoff and other defendants must make restitution of at least $25 million that was defrauded from clients, primarily the Native American tribes. Further, Abramoff owes the Internal Revenue Service $1.7 million as a result of his guilty plea to the tax evasion charge. In the agreement, Abramoff admits to bribing public officials, including Ney. Also included, the hiring of congressional staffers and conspiring with them to lobby their former employers including members of Congress in violation of a 1-year federal ban on such lobbying. On January 3, 2006, Abramoff pleaded guilty to 3 criminal felony counts related to the defrauding of American Indian tribes and corruption of public officials, in a Washington, D.C., federal court. The 4 tribes Abramoff and his associates had been involved with included Michigan's Saginaw Chippewas, California's Agua-Caliente, the Mississippi Choctaws, and the Louisiana Coushatters. Abramoff was accused of defrauding the tribes of tens of millions of dollars on issues associated with Indian gaming. Later in 2006, Abramoff lobbyists Neil Volz and Tony Rudy pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges. In September 2006, Ney himself pleaded guilty to conspiracy and making false statements. On September 4, 2008, a Washington court found him guilty of trading expensive gifts, meals and sports trips in exchange for political favors, and U.S. District Judge Ellen Siegel-Huvel sentenced him to a 4-year term in prison, to be served concurrently with his previous sentences. Abramoff cooperated in a bribery investigation involving lawmakers, their aides, and members of the Bush administration. People convicted in Abramoff probe, Adam Cadan, were sentenced in Florida in March 2006, serving 27 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Roger Stilwell, staff in the Department of the Interior under George W. Bush, pleaded guilty and received 2 years suspended sentence for not reporting hundreds of dollars worth of sports and concert tickets he received from Abramoff. Stephen Griles, the highest-ranking Bush administration official convicted in the scandal, pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. He admitted lying to a Senate committee about his relationship with Abramoff, who repeatedly sought Griles' intervention at Interior on behalf of Indian tribal clients. David Safavian, the Bush administration's former top procurement official, was sentenced to 18 months in prison in October 2006 after he was found guilty of covering up his dealings with Abramoff. Bob Ney, then U.S. Representative, pleaded guilty September 2006, sentenced in January 2007 to 2.5 years in prison, acknowledged taking bribes from Abramoff. Ney was in the traveling party on an Abramoff-sponsored golf trip to Scotland at the heart of the case against Safavian. Neil Volz, a former chief of staff to Ney who left government to work for Abramoff, pleaded guilty in May 2006 to conspiring to corrupt Ney and others with trips and other aid. William Heaton, former chief of staff for Ney, pleaded guilty to a federal conspiracy charge involving a golf trip to Scotland, expensive meals, and tickets to sporting events between 2002 and 2004 as payoffs for helping Abramoff's clients. Thomas Hart, former chief of staff for Ney, pleaded guilty to a federal conspiracy charge involving a golf trip to Scotland, expensive meals, and tickets to sporting events between 2002 and 2004 as payoffs for helping Abramoff's clients. Atalaya Federici, co-founder of the Council of Republicans for Environmental Advocacy, pleaded guilty to tax evasion and obstruction of a Senate investigation into Abramoff's relationship with officials at the Department of the Interior. Mark Zaschez, former aide to U.S. Representative Don Young, pleaded guilty to conspiracy. He acknowledged accepting tens of thousands of dollars worth of gifts and a golf trip to Scotland from Abramoff's team in exchange for official acts on the lobbyist's behalf. Kevin A. Ring, former staff to John Doolittle, was convicted of 5 charges of corruption. He was sentenced to 20 months in prison in October 2011. James Herney, former staff to Tim Hutchinson, was charged with wire fraud for giving a staffer for Don Young of Alaska a bribe in exchange for amendments to the federal highway bill. Tom DeLay, 2 of the House Majority Leader's former aides, were indicted. DeLay himself was investigated, but he was not indicted or convicted in connection with the Abramoff scandal. Michael Scanlon, a former staff member of Tom DeLay, pled guilty to committing bribery in the course of his work for Abramoff. Tony Rudy, another former staff member of Tom DeLay, he also left DeLay to work with Abramoff, pleaded guilty to conspiracy. John Albaugh, former chief of staff to Ernest Istook, pled guilty to accepting bribes connected to the federal highway bill. Istook was not charged. Judd Carpenter, vice president of the Council of Republicans for Environmental Advocacy, was discovered during the Abramoff investigation and pled guilty to income tax evasion. He got 45 days, plus 4 years probation. Robert E. Corlin, deputy chief of staff, Criminal Division of the Justice Department, pleaded guilty to conflict of interest after accepting bribes from Jack Abramoff. Horace Cooper, a former Labor Department official with the Bush administration and aide to Representative Dick Armey, pled guilty to falsifying a document when he did not report receiving gifts from Abramoff. Incarceration: Abramoff served 4 years of a 6-year sentence. On November 15, 2006, he began serving his term in the minimum security prison camp of Federal Correctional Institution, Cumberland, Maryland, as inmate number 27593-112. The Justice Department had requested that he serve his sentence there so as to be accessible to agents in Washington for cooperation as the investigations related to his associates intensified. Abramoff worked as a clerk in the prison chaplain unregistered trademark S office for 12 cents an hour. He was also teaching courses in public speaking and screenwriting to his fellow inmates and instituted a popular movie night. Post-release activities: on June 8, 2010, he was released from federal prison and was transferred to a halfway house in Baltimore, Maryland, until the end of his 6-year sentence. In late June he started working at the kosher pizzeria Tov Pizza, working about 40 hours a week from 10:30 a.m. till 5:30 p.m., earning between $7.50 and $10 per hour. He finished working at Tov Pizza when he was released from the halfway house on December 3, 2010. Criticism of lobbying industry: I was involved deeply in a system of bribery, legalized bribery for the most part that still to a large part exists today. In November 2011, the book Capital Punishment: The Hard Truth About Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyist Abramoff wrote after he was released from prison was published. The 300-page memoir is an account of his life in Washington as a lobbyist. In its last chapter, titled A OE Path to Reform Abramoff portrays himself as someone who supports genuine reform and lists a number of proposals to eliminate bribery of government officials, such as barring members of Congress and their aides for life from becoming lobbyists. Abramoff has become a critic of the lobbying industry and has appeared on radio and television, trying to redeem and rebrand himself Euro. He has a Facebook page and game app called OE Congressional Jack Euro, and a feature film in the works about the lobbying milieu. He plans to charge for giving talks about corruption in Washington, and has briefed FBI agents on the nature of corruption. He has joined the United Republic Anti-Corruption non-profit organization and has started in February 2012 as one of the lead bloggers at United Republica Squared's newly launched Republic Report, described as a Euro-oin anti-corruption blog focusing on how self-interested dollars are warping the public interest responsibilities of America's democratic institutions. A Euro by the Huffington Post. He has appeared as a guest on CNN to talk about lobbying and the Affordable Care Act healthcare reform law. In July 2012, Premier Networks announced it was launching the Jack Abramoff Show on XM Satellite Radio's Talk Radio channel, on which Abramoff would hold forth on political reform. Personal life: Abramoff is married to Pamela Clark Abramoff, a co-manager and executive assistant at Capital Athletic Foundation. Married since July 1986, the couple has 5 children. Pamela is a convert to Orthodox Judaism. See also, category, Jack Abramoff scandals, Jack Abramoff timeline, list of trips funded by Jack Abramoff, lobbying in the United States, Norman Schuh, list of federal political scandals in the United States, references. External links, official website, Jack Abramoff at the Internet Movie Database, posts by Jack Abramoff at Republic Report.